Ethan Miller thought he was driving toward love, but Sarah Johnson's innocent smile hid a truth that would twist his obsession into unimaginable violence. Ethan Miller was the kind of young man who moved through life quietly, unnoticed by most people around him. At 23, he had no real circle of friends, no girlfriend, and no one who made him feel truly important. His days blurred together, filled with work at a small warehouse, late dinners eaten in silence, and long hours on his phone. The glow of his screen became his world, and the conversations he found there became the only thing that made his life feel bigger than it was. It was on one of those long, lonely nights that he came across a profile that stopped him from scrolling further. Her name was Sarah. Her photos were bright and cheerful, her smile wide and genuine, and her simple words carried a kind of warmth that Ethan had never felt before. While so many profiles online seemed shallow or filled with empty lines, Sarah's stood out because it felt honest. She wrote about how much she loved music, how she volunteered at a local animal shelter, and how she hoped one day to find someone who could see her for who she really was. For Ethan, it was as if someone had finally noticed him in a world where he always felt invisible. He sent a short message, not expecting a reply, but to his surprise, Sarah responded quickly. What started as a few casual exchanges grew into longer conversations that stretched late into the night. Ethan would sit in the dark with his phone in hand, smiling at her words, rereading them when he had nothing else to do. She made him feel wanted, and that was something he had never truly felt before. As days turned into weeks, Sarah became the reason he looked forward to waking up, and the last thought on his mind before he went to sleep. He didn't care that her writing was sometimes simple, or that her pictures looked like they had been taken with an old camera. To him, those details only added to her charm. She wasn't trying to impress him with perfect photos or clever lines. She was just real, and that reality made him trust her more than he had trusted anyone else. Ethan began to imagine their future together. He thought about what it would feel like to hold her hand, to sit beside her, to have someone waiting for him when he came home at night. The fantasy grew stronger with every conversation, until it became less of a dream and more of a plan. Sarah lived in Indiana, not too far from Ohio where Ethan stayed, and after months of chatting, she asked him if he would come to see her. Her excitement leapt from the words on the screen, and Ethan felt his heart race as he read them. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He imagined the scene over and over, driving to her neighborhood, stepping out of his car, and finally seeing her in person. He pictured her smiling, maybe even running up to him. The thought filled him with hope and erased the emptiness he had carried for so long. What he didn't realize was that the meeting would not be what he expected. Hidden within the happiness of their plans was a truth he had not prepared himself to face, a truth that would twist his story into something far darker than he could have imagined. The morning Ethan set out for Indiana felt like the first day of a new life. He woke up earlier than usual, too restless to sleep, and packed a small bag with clothes, his phone charger, and the bouquet of flowers he had bought the night before. He stood in front of the mirror, staring at himself, adjusting his shirt again and again, as if he could will himself into becoming the man Sarah deserved to meet. For weeks he had counted down to this trip, marking the days on his calendar like a child waiting for a birthday. His stomach turned with nervous energy as he locked his apartment door and walked toward his car. The drive stretched before him, long but full of anticipation. The highway rolled out in endless lanes, and for the first hour he felt almost euphoric, blasting music, tapping the steering wheel, imagining the look on Sarah's face when she saw him. He pictured her laughter, her hugs, the way her eyes would brighten when he handed her the flowers. At times he had to remind himself to focus on the road, because the fantasy was so consuming that it pulled him away from reality. As the miles slipped by, though, cracks began to form in his confidence. He started to wonder what Sarah would really be like. Online conversations were easy, words typed from a distance, images carefully chosen. In person, she might look different. She might not act the way he had imagined. The perfect dream he had built up in his head might fall apart the second he arrived. He tried to push the thoughts away, telling himself that he had invested too much time to turn back now. The flowers sitting in the passenger seat became a reminder of the commitment he had already made. At a gas station, Ethan stopped to fill up and buy a bottle of water. He caught his reflection in the window as he stood by the pump, and for a moment he questioned everything. Was he ready to meet someone who had become such a huge part of his mind without ever stepping into his real life? Could she possibly live up to the person he had imagined her to be? He shook off the doubts, convincing himself that nerves were normal, and continued down the road. By the time he reached the outskirts of Sarah's town, the sun was high and the streets looked quiet. Neat houses lined the blocks, each with well-kept lawns and parked cars. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as he turned onto the street she had described. And then, just as she promised, she was there. Sarah stood near the driveway, waving eagerly, holding a handmade card with the word "Welcome" drawn in colorful letters. Her face was glowing with excitement, her joy as pure as the sunlight around her. But as Ethan's eyes locked on her, his excitement drained away. In that instant he noticed what she had never told him. Sarah had Down syndrome. The reality hit him with a force he hadn't expected, and his smile faded into something sharp and uncertain. The dream he had carried for months was no longer the same. Ethan's heart thudded in his chest as Sarah walked toward him, her smile wide and unguarded. She clutched the handmade card tightly, holding it out with pride, as though it were the most precious gift she could give. He forced himself to take it, his hands trembling, muttering a thank you that even he barely believed. She seemed thrilled just to be near him, chattering happily about how she had been waiting all morning for his arrival. For her, this was a dream coming true. For Ethan, the dream he had built so carefully was collapsing before his eyes. He had pictured a partner who would make him feel admired, someone who would fill the void of loneliness with romance and admiration. Instead, what he saw was innocence, vulnerability, and a truth he was unwilling to accept. Inside her family's home, Sarah introduced him proudly to her parents. They welcomed him with genuine warmth, their gratitude clear as they shook his hand. They believed he was someone special, someone who cared enough about their daughter to drive all the way to see her. They asked him to sit down for a meal, telling him stories about Sarah, her love of animals, her childlike fascination with music, and her dreams of a happy life. Ethan nodded politely, but every word only deepened his inner turmoil. He felt trapped in a place where kindness was suffocating him. He had come looking for love, but instead he felt cornered by a situation that clashed violently with the fantasy he had clung to. When the evening settled in, Sarah's parents suggested that the two of them spend some time together outside. They trusted him now, convinced he was safe for their daughter. Sarah led him to the backyard, where the fading sunlight stretched across the grass. She carried a small box in her hands and told him she had made something for him. With a shy but excited grin, she pulled out a bracelet made of colorful beads strung together unevenly. She slipped it into his palm and told him she hoped he would keep it forever. To her, the gift was an expression of pure affection. To Ethan, it was a cruel reminder of the gulf between what he wanted and what he had been given. He stared at the bracelet, his mind swirling with anger and disappointment. He felt cheated, as though the months of dreaming had been a trick, as though he had been led into believing something that wasn't real. Sarah, still smiling, stood close to him, waiting for his reaction. Her innocence only ignited his rage further. He couldn't see her joy for what it was. He only saw the destruction of his fantasy. The storm inside him boiled over. Without warning, he lashed out. His hands struck with sudden violence, cutting off her laughter and turning her bright face to stillness. The brutal act was over within moments, but it left a silence that seemed to swallow the entire yard. The handmade card lay crumpled on the ground, the bracelet still clutched in his fist, while Sarah's body lay motionless beside the flowers he had once brought as a symbol of love. In a single, irreversible moment, the illusion of romance had turned into an act of unspeakable cruelty. The quiet evening in Sarah's neighborhood shattered quickly when her parents realized something was wrong. They had expected her to come back inside with Ethan after a short while in the yard, but the minutes stretched into an uncomfortable silence. At first, they assumed she was lost in conversation, perhaps showing him her favorite things outside. But when her laughter, usually so easy to hear, never floated back through the open windows, unease crept into their hearts. Sarah's mother stepped out to call for her, her voice sharp with worry. There was no answer. The backyard appeared calm, too calm, and the sight of the abandoned flowers by the patio raised a chilling alarm. Panic surged through the family as they searched every corner of the yard and the nearby street. Neighbors noticed the commotion and joined in, walking with flashlights, calling Sarah's name into the dimming light. Fear grew heavier by the second. She was known throughout the community for her bright, trusting spirit, and everyone understood how vulnerable she was if something had happened. Her father dialed 911, his voice breaking as he explained that their daughter was missing and that she had last been seen with a man who had come to visit her. Within minutes, patrol cars lined the street, their flashing lights cutting through the darkness. Officers began by speaking to the family, gathering details about Ethan. Sarah's phone was retrieved, and her message history was reviewed. The name Ethan Miller appeared again and again, with affectionate notes and promises of a visit. It didn't take long for police to realize who their primary focus had to be. Witnesses in the neighborhood confirmed they had seen a young man arrive earlier that day. His car had been spotted parked out front, and neighbors remembered the awkward smile he wore as he followed Sarah inside. The search for Sarah expanded rapidly. Police dogs were brought in to comb the nearby woods and fields. Helicopters hovered overhead with bright spotlights, scanning for any trace of her. What they eventually found confirmed the community's worst fears, signs of violence in the yard where she had last been with Ethan. The discovery turned the search into a criminal investigation. Now it wasn't just about finding Sarah, it was about finding the man who had vanished as suddenly as she had. Word spread fast through the small town. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers gathered at the local church to hold a vigil, their candles glowing against the night sky. Sarah's smiling photographs were pinned to bulletin boards, surrounded by flowers and notes of love. The shock was unbearable. She had always been cherished for her kindness, her openness, and her ability to make everyone around her feel special. The idea that someone had taken advantage of that innocence felt like a wound cut deep into the heart of the community. As detectives pieced together Ethan's trail, the town held its breath. What had begun as an innocent visit had spiraled into a night where no one could have imagined, and the man responsible was now on the run. Ethan did not make it far before the weight of his crime began to close in around him. He drove aimlessly through the night, the bouquet of flowers still lying on the passenger seat, their petals wilting in silence. The bracelet Sarah had given him remained in his pocket, a reminder of what he had destroyed in a sudden eruption of rage. He checked into a cheap highway motel, hiding his car in the back lot as though parking it out of sight could erase the evidence of what he had done. He paced the small room, replaying the moment again and again, his anger fading into an emptiness that left him hollow. Sleep never came, only the constant hum of his own thoughts and the fear that every sound outside was the police closing in. Investigators, meanwhile, were working with precision. Phone records placed Ethan's number in Sarah's messages and confirmed his trip from Ohio to Indiana. Surveillance cameras along the highway captured his car passing through tolls, building a clear trail of his movements. Witnesses from the neighborhood gave consistent descriptions, and within a day his name and photo were broadcast on local news stations. He went from a lonely young man searching for connection to the prime suspect in a brutal crime that shocked the state. The manhunt gained speed. Officers tracked his bank card use when he paid for gas and the motel room. Every careless move he made tightened the circle around him. When they finally found him, he was sitting in the dim motel room, staring blankly at the television. The bouquet of flowers was still in his car, untouched and forgotten, a grotesque symbol of the meeting that was supposed to change his life. The arrest was quiet. He offered no resistance, only a vacant stare as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The trial that followed was swift and devastating. Prosecutors described in detail how Ethan's disappointment had twisted into violence, how he had taken advantage of Sarah's trust, and turned a moment of joy into horror. The jury listened to the evidence, the messages that had built Sarah's hope, the bracelet found in Ethan's possession, the forensic proof from the yard. The community filled the courtroom, their grief heavy, their anger unmistakable. Sarah's parents sat silently, holding hands, their faces pale with sorrow. When the verdict was read, the outcome was clear. Ethan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge's words rang out as a final declaration. The brutality of his act had destroyed not only a young woman's life, but also the faith of a community that had believed in kindness and trust. In the months that followed, Sarah's memory became a source of unity. Vigils were held in her honor, photographs of her bright smile shared across town. Her story spread beyond the borders of her neighborhood, becoming a reminder of the hidden dangers of online relationships and the responsibility to protect those most vulnerable. Though her life was cut short in an act of cruelty, her name lived on as a symbol of innocence betrayed and a warning of how quickly love can twist into tragedy. Ethan's crime left a scar that would never heal, but Sarah's spirit remained in the hearts of those who had known her best.